Monday morning edition of Hot Mic rolls on. Our guy Jeff Kolpak joined us about a half hour, give us the lowdown on everything Bison football after a big win NDSU had on Saturday over Southeast Missouri State. But our Mondays are always led off by our guy Sam Herder from Hero Sports, BetMGM, to cover everything happening in FCS football as we wrapped up week 3 of the season. We'll just start where we left off. We were showing the highlights of the UND-Montana game on Saturday. It was the best game of the weekend heading in. It certainly lived up to it. Let's first start with UND. What do we take away from the Fighting Hawks for the first 3 games of the season?
Yeah, I think despite its record off to a 1-2 start now, I think easily could be 3-0 or even 2-1, and so I think UND has certainly exceeded expectations with how good they've looked. Kaminsky has come in and has really solidified that quarterback spot. I think the offensive line is playing well. Running game probably needs to get going a little bit more than what we've seen, especially because they have such a loaded running back room. They can go 3 deep there. And so that's something that they could probably improve on. And that part of UND probably isn't reaching expectations as far as their ground game. But I thought they went into Montana and played super well for 3.5 quarters. And the Hawks are going to go back and look at that tape. And especially in the first half there, where there was 3 trips into or near the red zone, and they only got 3 points total out of that, whether it was trying to go for it on 4th and 1 and getting stopped instead of getting 3. At the end of the first half, I know you talked about that, where I think Kaminsky felt like he probably didn't have enough time to spike the ball, and so he fake spiked it and threw it into the end zone. Had they been able to spike the ball, could have kicked the field goal, that 3 points would have been very valuable. So there was just a lot of small moments there for UND. When they turn on the film, they're going to be like, man, they should have won that game, but this is now 2 games where they haven't been able to close it out on the road, and those are definitely learning moments there.
The touchdown they got called back is a huge thing that UND fans are going to cling to, and I don't blame them. There was a pass interference that they thought should have been called that wasn't down the stretch, and Eric Schmidt said it. You just can't put yourself in positions to let the officials try and call it for you. That being said, they are way better than I thought. I thought they would be better. They are beyond that from what I've seen through the first 3 games.
Yeah, and there's just a different energy about the program too, and with what Coach Schmidt is doing, some of the stuff off the field as far as just operating, more efficiently and setting their guys up for success, whether it's the facilities they have up or investing more in nutrition and strength and conditioning, and I know they're recruiting at a higher level as well. That's not necessarily going to reflect on the 2025 season, but I do think the momentum is there as far as bringing in more talented guys with more athletic bodies and those sort of things. And I think now UND, we've seen UND in past years have good starts. I mean, they beat Montana last year, who was number 4 at the time, and then things just kind of fell apart from there. So they got to it's 1-2. They're coming off a loss. It's kind of weird to say they're riding some good momentum, but in a sense they kind of are. And now they have to keep on riding this momentum, not have any letdown performances. And they get some key games at home with NDSU and South Dakota State. So I think this is a year where I thought UND had a pretty good chance at making the playoffs. Now I think they're really looking good as a playoff team.
I'll say this though, their first 3 Valley games, and I was looking at this morning, Sam, after the bye, they go to Northern Iowa, host Youngstown, at SIU. Those are 3 difficult games to start conference play. We'll know a ton about them out of those 3 games in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are, like you said, 3 good tests to start, especially on the road. And that was a kind of a storyline around UND in past seasons of kind of their road woes. And yeah, they're 0-2 on the road so far this year, but I don't know if you can really chalk that up to, road woes, because they played 2 really good teams on the road. And so, but when they go on some of these Valley trips, I think that will also be a true test just to see if they can kind of get over that. I feel like it was more of a mental hurdle at times last year to get over that. And I feel like they'll do things behind the scenes operationally to, I don't know what specifically, but to just hammer home, the fact that they can't have these letdown performances on the road.
Those are 2 places they haven't won. Cedar Falls and Carbondale, they've not won. That alone, that goes right to your point of getting over a mental block. All right, we're showing the end of the game. Give us the out on Montana. Now, Montana had only played a D2 team, so this was their first game against an FCS opponent. What do we make of the Griz through 2 games?
I mean, a massive comeback here, and It sets Montana up really well because they've had some early season disappointing losses in past years, whether it was Northern Arizona a couple of years ago, last year was UND. But to get this win, really sets Montana up really well because they have a pretty favorable schedule where they get a lot of their toughest opponents at home. And to
Right.
get, this win, early on, get a ranked win on their resume, I think it sets the Grizz up very nicely to go on a nice string of wins here and, be in play for a top four playoff seed, if not a top two playoff seed. I think there's a chance we could have a really good battle between the Montana schools, NDSU,
Mm.
South Dakota State, Tarleton State's going to be in that mix
Yep.
as well when it comes to playoff positioning. And, Montana didn't play very well for a lot of this game. And I know there's a lot of Grizz fans in my mentions being frustrated with not being able to run the ball. And, Ayat's making some good plays, but then making some bad
Yeah.
plays. And the two throws he made on that game winning drive were just big time throws. And it kind of makes you forget right before his first big throw, I think it was third and long, and he had a guy open along the sidelines and he underthrew them. And that allowed the defender to catch up and make a play. And I remember getting ready to tweet, if you're Ayat, you got to make that throw in
Yeah.
that moment. But then the next play, he makes a big time throw to reset the chains. And so I think he had a tough year last year because they were rotating, and anytime he would make a mistake, they would pull him and then put Fife in. I think you're seeing Montana now saying, "All right, he's our guy," and he's had some bad plays, some interceptions in these first two games, but when you can go back to the sideline and talk to the coach and say, "All right, you're going back out there. This is what you need to do. This is what we're seeing," instead of you throw an interception, you go back to the sideline, you don't know if you're going back in or not if they're putting the other guy in. And so I think the fact that they're just riding with the Ayats, I think we're kind of seeing him grow up in front of our eyes because that was a big time drive, the game winning drive there.
You mentioned, and our guy Drew Trafton is a big Grizz fan. They have, I believe, 7 home games this year, maybe even 8. I mean, they have a dynamite schedule to take advantage of, including, they have Indiana State and Sacred Heart as other non-conference games. So they're able to get there, and they have the Cats at the end in Missoula. The Brawl of the Wild game is there. There's an opportunity if they can start putting some wins together to really get going. Now, second week in a row, we're going to talk about South Dakota. And second week in a row, I'm mystified on what we've seen out of the Coyotes. Obviously, we know the news on Charles Pierre Jr. We talked about that with Jay Elson late in the week, last week, Sam, and he's done for the year. They barely, and I mean barely, beat Northern Colorado. Now, Northern Colorado might be better. They certainly scared the heck out of Colorado State, but the Coyotes are this close to being 0-3 right now.
Yeah, and that it would have been a disastrous loss losing to Northern Colorado, especially at home. But they were able to pull it out at the end there. And part of you wonders about Northern Colorado a little bit if they are that improved because they did, like you said, give Colorado State a scare a couple of weeks ago. But this is a needed win for USD, and I could maybe see them getting bumped back even more in the polls just because of barely eking out a win here over a struggling Northern Colorado team. But they just, offensively, they're just missing a lot, especially in the passing game. They just seem timing wise, or some of it could be pass protection. Some of it is just Bauman being a little bit off, or, some other times there's just it looks like some miscommunication where maybe the wide receiver is supposed to sit in the zone, but he kind of goes to the inside a little bit and Bauman is just off there. So something is just not missing there. But the emergence of LJ Phillips goes for over 300 yards rushing. I mean, they needed that, especially without Charles Pierre. So they get a win, but it's still a lot, left to be desired there for USD. They got to figure things out in a hurry.
I actually dropped them 2 spots. I don't know in your poll. I dropped them 2 in mine. I know they won, but it's still something just seems off with them right now. They just don't seem like what I know who's not there. Just doesn't seem like they have whatever it is. They have it at least so far in 2025.
Yeah, they're in my 20s somewhere, and that's a pretty big drop considering they're in the top 5 a couple of weeks ago at this time. So yeah, the Yotes are they've definitely kind of fallen off the radar a little bit, and we'll see if they can turn it around.
They have Drake this weekend, and then the Bison, and NDSU sitting with a bye week, and then has that, and with 2 straight regular season losses to USD. I think the Bison are going to be amped for that game. I really believe that when South Dakota comes up here in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and NDSU has. I mean, we expected them to be 3-0 at this point, obviously, and really expected NDSU to have decisive victories in these first 3 games. But I think dominating as much as they have, you can pick at the strength of opponents and all that, but when not even dominate at almost embarrass, these opponents. And I
Yep.
guess SEMO, that was a not competitive game, but it wasn't like an embarrassing, performance or anything like that. But the Citadel, Tennessee State, I mean, those were just two overmatched opponents. So I think NDSU is kind of, in a sense, exceeded expectations as far as how they've won. And now with the bye week, and now the true gauge of NDSU obviously will be once Valley play hits.
Yes.
I remember I think it was like 2023 when there was a ton of question marks about NDSU going into this season. And, they played really well in the non-conference. And I remember talking about NDSU, like they looked a lot better than expected, but then conference play hit and there were a couple of losses there early on. I don't expect that to happen this year, but my point is just the best gauge is Valley opponents for the Bison.
What do we make of the Jacks on Saturday night? I was not impressed with how they played against Drake.
Yeah, it was an underwhelming performance,
Um,
and I think most of South Dakota State fans will agree. It was just kind of I watched the whole thing, and I was kind of expecting to flip it off at halftime, just because, usually when it's a blowout game like that, you turn it to other games that are closer. But it was just, I mean, it was a great crowd,
yep.
19,000 plus, but it was kind of just a sleepy environment. You could tell that South Dakota State fans were like, we know we're going to win this game. And SDSU, maybe a bit of a emotional letdown after, two big wins. And it wasn't really a game where you felt like, oh, is Drake actually gonna be in this and have a chance to win it? It's like South Dakota State would go up 3 scores and then Drake would kind of just be gritty, and their quarterback run got going a little bit and
Yep.
they would go down and score, and it'd be a 2 possession game and they're kind of hanging around and South Dakota State's kind of playing with its food. So like my opinion doesn't really change a whole lot about South Dakota State. I'm still mostly judging them off of their first 2 games, which were impressive wins.
Yep.
This was kind of just a sleeper performance. So don't really knock SDSU, for this performance a lot, just because you take their overall body of work. But it was still kind of they had a lot of momentum. Then you watch this game, you're kind of like, it's pretty underwhelming. They still have a lot of work to do, but overall, I think the Jacks are sitting pretty good.
We'll get to Sam's games for week 4 here in just a second. Was there any other teams that stood out to you that had good performances from this past weekend?
Yeah, I think Tarleton State is.
Yeah, there they go again.
Yeah, and Central Arkansas is, they were down last year when they had a lot of expectations and they lost a lot of their key talent. But Central Arkansas is always, even if they're not a playoff team, they're at least top 40, top 35 type of team. And Tarleton State goes on the road and wins 56-10, hung 42 points in the first half. Tarleton State is just rolling right now, and so that was an impressive win. West Georgia keeps on
Yep.
winning. They're 3-0. This is just their second season in the FCS, so they are not playoff eligible. But I think they are kind of an FCS newbie that is looking good. And then UIW, they lost pretty decisively to UTSA, who's a FBS opponent. They lost 48-20. That was a game that a lot of people thought UIW could at least be competitive in, and it sounds like UIW is going to make a quarterback change. They're going with Colson, who was I think a UCF or USF transfer at quarterback. So that was one result that kind of stood out. You felt like UIW could maybe bring back some momentum with an upset there, but they lost pretty decisively.
I gotta give it up for the United. The United Athletic Conference is playing. That's obvious. That's where West Georgia is. Obviously, that's Tarleton's league, Abilene Christian's league. Those are teams committed to playing football. They want to be good in football, and I think we're seeing the results of that.
Yeah, and I had a tweet out last week talking about the UAC has had a really good non-conference, whether it's some of their FBS wins, whether they have some ranked wins, whether it's even, some things as small as Utah Tech, who's not expected to be very good. They've had actually 3 competitive games now against ranked Big Sky opponents. And so what you do in the non-conference kind of sets the stage of how not only voters, but the playoff committee looks at you. And let's just say hypothetically that Tarleton State is 12-0 with an FBS win. NDSU is 11-1 with one loss to South Dakota State. South Dakota State is, maybe they have a loss, somewhere else. So then let's say Montana is 11-1. Like, where does Tarleton State fit into that mix? Are they a top 2 seed, or do they get bumped behind 2 one-loss teams in NDSU and South Dakota State? I don't know, but I feel like the UAC overall has gotten the respect where an undefeated Tarleton State team is going to be viewed differently than a 11-1 SoCon team in the past. I think the UAC has earned that respect.
Let's save that for later in the year. We could have that debate, but I don't doubt that we may have that conversation come up later in the year. Let's go through your spotlight games. What are you looking forward to this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, we'll see what the rankings are a little bit later this morning, but it seems like we're probably going to have 3 ranked matchups. That's Villanova going to Monmouth. That's a good CAA matchup right there. Austin P goes to Abilene Christian. 2 more ranked UAC teams, and then UIW at Northern Arizona. Northern Arizona got a really impressive
Nice
win
win.
on the road
Yep.
at Southern Utah, which is a tough place to play. We'll see if UIW is still ranked. I bumped them out of my rankings. I still think UIW is going to end up ranked just because sometimes it takes a while for other voters to bump them out. So that could be a good ranked matchup right there. UIW needs that win. If they lose, they're off to a 1-3 start. And then the last one is Southern Illinois at SEMO. Not a ranked matchup, but a good gauge for SIU. It's a really fun rivalry game as well. SIU went to UT Martin and got a pretty decisive win. That's probably another result we should highlight because I know UT Martin wasn't ranked, but they've kind of always been in that mix. And for Southern Illinois to win decisively on the road like that, I think was really impressive. And now they have to go on the road for this rivalry game, so I think that's another fun one.
Battle for the wheel, always a good one there between SIU and SEMO. Great stuff as always, Bud. Appreciate the time, and we'll do this again next Monday, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
There he goes, Sam Herder from Hero Sports, BetMGM. He starts our week off as we wrap up what we saw in the FCS and look ahead to the upcoming week. We'll break. We come back. We'll wrap up our first hour. Jeff Kolpak coming up. Give us all the goods on the Bison as they head into their bye week and much more on a Overreaction Monday. We're back right after this.